I knew the week was going to be hell the moment I walked in and saw him. Feet on my desk. My desk. The ergonomic chair I'd picked after 3 back injuries. The monitor I'd calibrated down to the pixel. Even the mug that said world's okayest executive. All of it suddenly belonged to some 26-year-old kid with a trust fund haircut and an ego bigger than the balance sheet. He looked up from his phone, grin wide and lazy, like I'd just interrupted his photo shoot. "You must be Amy," he said. "Pop said you'd be cool with this." Cool with what, exactly? Him parked in my chair like a dollar store king on his throne? And then, like the universe needed me to hate him faster, he raised his phone, angled it just right, and snapped a selfie. Caption already drafted. I saw the words flash across the screen before he hit post. Day 1. Finally took over this place. He tagged the company. He geotagged the office. He blasted it onto Instagram before I could even process the stupidity. That was the moment my stomach didn't drop. It calcified. Because I'd seen this movie before. 16 years in corporate trenches, you get familiar with every species of executive parasite. The empty suit, the buzzword visionary, the cousin shadowing the board. But this one? The CEO's son. Posting selfies in an acquisition window? That wasn't just arrogance. That was a nuclear misstep. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I lose it? Flip the desk? Demand he delete the post before it spread? Because I don't shout, I forward emails. And months ago, while everyone else was drunk on champagne from the Series D announcement, I was the one who stayed up till 3 a.m., reading the fine print of the acquisition packet. Clause 7, page 38. Buried under layers of boilerplate, so boring even legal had skimmed it. But not me. It read, "Any misrepresentation of authority, reputational harm, or breach of confidentiality by an employee or affiliated party may result in immediate contract termination at the buyer's discretion." It was written for this exact scenario. And the CEO's son, barefoot, smug, and already hashtagging his legacy, had just triggered it on record. I didn't even look at him. I walked straight past his sneakers into the copier room, pulled the acquisition binder I'd memorized months ago, and printed Clause 7 on neon highlighted paper. Then I slid it into an envelope with one sticky note on top. Clause 7 triggered. Attached? A screenshot of his post, time-stamped, geotagged, the caption glowing like a confession. I didn't CC the board. I didn't even CC my boss. I BCC'd everyone. And then I sent it straight to legal. By the time he realized I'd left the room, I was already packing a box. Not the dramatic kind. No slamming, no tears. Just my mug, a framed picture of my niece, and a USB loaded with system architecture version histories. "Half day?" HR chirped as I passed with the box in my arms. "Something like that," I said. They didn't know. Not yet. Nobody did. But the thing about systems, especially the ones I design, is they always log who's sitting at the console when the detonation button gets pushed. And him? The new prince of nepotism? He just leaned in so far I didn't need to lift a finger. I walked out like a ghost, silent and already gone. No one chased me. Why would they? The acquisition hadn't even gone public yet. They thought the circus hadn't started. But me? I already knew the clowns were center stage. By the time they figured out what Clause 7 meant, it would be too late. When I left that building, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, just me with my banker's box, the same box everyone eventually carries out. But the difference? Mine wasn't full of loss. It was full of receipts. I drove across town to my storage unit, a glorified concrete closet I paid $40 a month for. Inside, filing cabinets nobody knew about. Contracts, patents, side agreements. Every breadcrumb I'd collected since the CEO started whispering about succession planning. See, nepotism doesn't just happen. It brews, quietly, like mold behind wallpaper. You see the signs. The son suddenly hanging around the office, the board pretending not to notice, the CEO casually mentioning future leaders at family barbecues. Most people roll their eyes and move on. But me? I prepare. And that's why, while Chase was busy hashtagging his reign of incompetence, I had already built my exits. Now, here's the thing. People think revenge comes in one big moment. It doesn't. It comes in layers. You plant seeds, you wait, and when the storm hits, you already know which trees will fall. So, I set my banker's box down, pulled open the cabinet, and flipped to the binder labeled "In Case of Dumbassery." Sharpie on the front, underlined twice. Inside, my LLC registration, licensing agreements, and patents linked to my name. Not the company's. Mine. All neat, legal, and signed months ago. By the time I locked the unit and headed home, the first email had already landed in my inbox. Subject: Clause 7 inquiry, urgent from legal. 2 words in the body. Call me. I didn't. Because I knew the chain reaction had already started. Now, I know what you're wondering. Why didn't they just brush it off? Pretend it was a dumb joke? Because acquisitions aren't built on trust. They're built on paranoia. Every comma in those contracts exists because someone once got burned. And Clause 7? That was the nuclear eject button. At 9:43 a.m., while I was brewing tea, a second email came through. This time from procurement. Can you clarify licensing ownership of the analytics module? There it was. The crack in the dam. They'd started looking. Back at headquarters, the mood had shifted. I wasn't there, but I could picture it. The copy machines humming, the HR team eating sheet cake for someone's birthday, while 2 floors up, legal was in a war room with printouts spread like crime scene photos. Someone would have printed Chase's selfie. Someone else would have highlighted the caption in yellow. And then, as silence fell, someone would have read Clause 7 out loud. I knew exactly how it went because I'd sat in those rooms before. First comes denial. Maybe it doesn't count. Maybe it's not binding. Then bargaining. He's not technically an employee. He didn't log into the system. And finally, the cold realization. Perception matters more than intent. And perception had already gone viral. But me? I stayed calm. I watered the plants, answered a text from my sister about dinner next week. Because while they were panicking, I was waiting. And waiting is an art form. By noon, the buyer had gone quiet. That's how you know it's bad. Silence. No cheerful Slack pings, no looking forward to onboarding emails. Just the kind of dead air that makes directors sweat through their suits. I heard from a friend in compliance that by lunchtime, people were whispering in the hallways. Did you see what Chase posted? Is the deal dead? Of course, it wasn't dead yet, but it was bleeding out. And while they scrambled to stop the hemorrhage, I did something incredibly ordinary. I opened my laptop and scrolled through my folder labeled Merger Watch. Inside, every contract redline, every NDA, every time-stamped update, my safety net, my leverage, my story, written in signatures and clauses no one else bothered to read. Because here's the truth. Corporations don't fall because of dramatic speeches or one bad Instagram post. They fall because the people holding them together quietly decide to let go. And I had just let go. By the next morning, the silence wasn't just noticeable. It was suffocating. Normally, when a merger is about to close, you hear it in the building before you see it. Constant emails, onboarding packets, conference calls that bleed past midnight. But now, my phone stayed quiet. No updates, no cheerful reminders, just a single notification from LinkedIn. Someone had viewed my profile from an IP address in New York, buyer side. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't calling my boss. They were looking at me. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the walls were closing in. A friend from finance and someone I trusted texted me around 9:15. They printed the selfie. It's on the table in the 14th floor war room. Clause 7 highlighted I could see it without being there. Directors sitting stiff, coffee going cold, no one daring to say out loud what the paper already screamed. First came the excuses. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe the buyer won't notice. But buyers notice everything. That's why Clause 7 existed in the first place. It wasn't ornamental. It was a trapdoor, and Chase had just stomped on it with both feet. At 9:47, my friend sent another text. Buyer counsel emailed. 3 questions. Who is Chase? What is his role? Does he speak for the company? 3 questions that should have been easy. Except there were no answers that didn't sound like negligence. Now, I know what you're thinking. Couldn't Martin, the CEO, the proud father, just wave it away? Say his son was shadowing, harmless, not part of the org chart? He tried. I heard later he wrote back, an unfortunate attempt at humor. No formal authority, but perception doesn't care about intent. And perception had already been screenshot, time-stamped, and passed around faster than office gossip at happy hour. Meanwhile, I stayed home, made another pot of jasmine tea, cleaned my kitchen, and kept my laptop open on the counter. Emails trickled in. Procurement again. Please clarify licensing ownership. Legal. Need confirmation on middleware rights. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the truth was, they already knew the answer. They were just hoping I'd make it easier by handing them a loophole. Noon. That's when the buyer froze everything. Calls canceled. Shared Slack channel archived. Meeting invites disappeared mid-refresh. For anyone who's been through a merger, you know what that means. Death by silence. Inside the building, panic set in. Directors started forwarding Chase's post up the chain. Is this real? Why didn't we know about this? Where's Amy? And that last question, where's Amy, was the one they should have asked months ago. Because I was the backbone of the system, and they'd let me walk out without a sound. By 12:37, my friend texted again. Board demanding list of every system you touched. They're realizing they can't answer buyer questions without you. That was the crack widening into a canyon. Because the truth was simple. I hadn't just touched the systems. I was the systems. The architecture, the analytics, the vendor stack. All of it tied back to code I'd written, contracts I'd structured, licenses I controlled. But they hadn't noticed. Until now. At 1:15, another text. Board call at 4. They're not smiling. I leaned back in my chair, tea cooling in my hand, and let it wash over me. Because this wasn't rage. This wasn't panic. This was inevitability. The avalanche had started, and I wasn't under it. I was watching from a distance, safe, prepared, and very much in control. And the best part? They still thought they could contain it. By the time the clock struck 4, the boardroom might as well have been a bunker. 7 directors dialed in from across the country, cameras off, voices sharp. In the middle sat Martin Vance, CEO, father, and now unwilling chaperone of the mess his son had created. The infamous selfie was printed in triplicate on the table, Clause 7 highlighted in yellow like a warning flare. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. Friends inside fed me pieces afterward, and the story was always the same. The meeting was less strategy, more autopsy. Let's begin, Martin had said, trying for calm. We're not beginning anything, snapped Gloria Tran, head of risk oversight. We're cleaning up. The first item, Chase. His name was already poison. Within minutes, the board voted unanimously to ban him from all company premises, systems, and communications. No hesitation, not even from Martin. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Less than 36 hours ago, Chase had been playing CEO from my chair. Now he didn't even have a badge. The second item was Martin himself. Mr. Vance, Gloria continued, voice flat as stone. Based on the material breach initiated under your leadership, we are recommending administrative leave effective immediately. Pending investigation, Martin tried to fight. Respectfully, I believe I'm being scapegoated. Cynthia Shaw, meticulous and unflinching, didn't even look up from her notes. You gave your unvetted son access to an executive office during an active acquisition. That's not scapegoating. That's negligence. They called a vote, 7 hands raised. Martin didn't raise his. By 4:09, he was out. And then came the question that mattered most. Where's Amy? Silence fell. Because that was the heart of the implosion. The buyer didn't care about Martin's ego. They cared about systems, contracts, ownership, all of which traced back to me. Procurement had already dug up my filings. DM Strategic Systems, LLC. My name on licenses. My signature on middleware agreements. The reality was unavoidable. The architecture didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. Martin had tried to bury that months ago, instructing ops to sanitize my documents before submission. But mergers are paperwork mountains, and somewhere along the line, someone missed a page. Page 14 of the appendix, plain as day. All middleware components supporting operational analytics and vendor harmonization shall be licensed through DM Strategic Systems, LLC, with exclusive rights for deployment, adaptation, and modification. There it was. Ordinary words, dull legal phrasing. But to the board, it was a landmine. Because the buyer had this version, they'd built their integration map on it. And now it was binding. One director muttered, "We can amend it. Issue a revised plan." "You're not listening," Gloria cut in. "The buyer already has this plan. It's foundation. You can't rewrite history." Cynthia leaned forward. "And even if you could, Donna," she corrected herself, then said my name with deliberate precision. "Amy is the one with control, not us." That was the moment the truth settled. The company wasn't just bleeding a deal. They'd handed me the scalpel. After Martin's removal, the lawyers flipped through the binder, sweat spotting the pages. "Technically," one paralegal said, "we don't own the middleware layer." "We license it," Martin, still sitting pale and silent, tried one last defense. "Then cancel the license." But even that had been covered. The survivability clause. My survivability clause. It stated that even if the merger collapsed, license terms remained enforceable. Revocation required mutual consent. Mine. At that point, the room went quiet. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind, when everyone knows the game is over, but no one wants to be the first to say it. Finally, Harold Kessler, oldest and meanest of the directors, broke the silence. "We need to contact Amy." And just like that, the woman they'd ignored, dismissed, and quietly replaced with the CEO's son became the only name that mattered. By the time I got their message that evening, polite, careful, almost begging, I didn't even have to smile, because I'd already won. The message from the board landed in my inbox at 8:12 p.m. Subject: request for clarification and re-engagement. The tone was formal, clinical, but underneath it was desperation. They wanted me back, not as an employee, not as staff. They wanted me to save them. I read it twice, then a third time. They asked for a confidential session regarding systems integration and associated IP rights. They understood my expertise was critical to mitigating damage. In other words, the deal was slipping through their fingers, and I was the only one with a rope. I set my laptop aside, poured myself a cup of jasmine tea, and let them wait. By morning, the buyer's rep had joined the chorus. His email was shorter, sharper. "Would you be willing to license your system independently, directly through your LLC?" That was it. No pleasantries, just business. And right there, in black and white, was the moment I'd been waiting for. The merger, the panic, the humiliation. All of it funneled down to a single sentence. They no longer owned me. I owned the system. And if they wanted it, they'd come to me. At 10 a.m., the video call began. On one side, the board. Faces stiff, clothes too polished, each of them sitting a little straighter than usual. On the other side, the buyer's representative. Calm, precise, and clearly here to decide if anything could still be salvaged. And then me. No boardroom, no corner office. Just my webcam, angled slightly off-center with my mug beside me. "Thank you for joining, Ms. Moore," the buyer's rep said. "We'll be direct. Luxec still wants the system. We believe in its integrity despite recent complications. He paused. Would you license it to us independently? I didn't flinch, didn't smile, just said, yes. The board exhaled, relief flooding their faces. Too soon. Triple the original rate, I added. The silence that followed was almost comical. Someone on the board unmuted, about to argue, but the buyer's rep raised a hand. He wasn't surprised. He expected it. And one more thing, I said. I want a seat on the board. Full voting rights, or no deal. The air froze. You could almost hear the directors choking on their pride. But pride doesn't pay for acquisitions, and survival was all they had left. Finally, Harold Kessler muttered, motion to approve. Seconded, Gloria said, eyes steady. Confirmed, Cynthia added, her voice clipped. No one objected. Not now. Not after everything. The buyer's rep nodded once. Then we're aligned. I didn't thank them, didn't smirk. I simply clicked leave meeting. That was all. By the afternoon, Martin's termination had been finalized. The press release said he was pursuing new opportunities. Internally, everyone knew the truth. His son had pulled the pin, and I had walked away holding the detonator. As for me, I didn't return as an employee. I didn't want the catered lunches or the parking space or the office with a view. I wanted ownership, control, the thing they had taken for granted until it was too late. And now, I had it. That evening, I sat on my porch, storm clouds rolling over the fields, tea cooling in my hand. My inbox buzzed, requests from firms that had once passed me over for flashier names. Subject lines like, urgent, integration help needed, confidential consultation inquiry. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because here's the truth. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Quiet. Patient. Until the moment everyone realizes they can't move without you. And that's the message I want you to take from this. You don't have to be the loudest in the room to win. You don't need to slam doors or scream for credit. Sometimes the most devastating power move is forwarding one email and letting the system collapse under its own arrogance. So to anyone out there who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, remember Clause 7. Remember that leverage doesn't come from noise. It comes from preparation, from patience, from knowing exactly when to let go. And when that day comes, when the people who ignored you suddenly realize they need you, you'll have a choice. Do you save them? Or do you finally choose yourself? Me? I chose myself, and I never looked back. They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back, but for me it was a plastic badge tossed into a trash bin. We've reassessed you. Ivy Brandt smirked. She was perched in the leather chair her father once ruled from like a general on campaign. To 0. She flicked her wrist, and my ID badge, 10 years of loyalty, late nights, million-dollar contracts, landed in the bin with the hollow clink of something disposable. I stood very still, hands clasped neatly behind my back, the way I used to when presenting quarterly projections to investors. The way I did during crises, when calm was the only weapon. She thought she was breaking me. All she did was confirm I'd been right to prepare. Behind her hovered Tucker, her new assistant, 22 years old, finance bro haircut. The kind of grin that comes only when you've never failed at anything that mattered. He snorted like Ivy had delivered the line of the century. You've been here since, the fax machine era? Ivy twirled her father's pen between two manicured fingers like a villain in training. She barely looked at me as she scrolled her phone with the other hand. Your legacy bloat. We're streamlining. You'll land somewhere. She tossed a manila envelope across the desk. It skidded to a stop next to a half-eaten acai bowl, bright purple melting into paperwork. Generous exit package. HR's waiting. Security will walk you out in 10. I bent to pick up the envelope. Not because I cared about the money, but because I wanted to see if she'd flinch when I stood back up. She didn't. That's when I saw it. Framed behind her, slightly crooked, like the universe had a sense of humor. The original investor covenant. 12 years ago, I had helped draft that document in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and panic. My name was still there, etched in legal permanence. Key operational stakeholder, Laura Keller. I let myself smile, just a flicker. "You don't seem upset," Ivy said, narrowing her eyes. She expected tears, begging, bargaining. Instead, I gave her silence. Silence unnerves people like Ivy more than shouting ever could. She pressed her father's executive stamp onto a form without aligning it properly. His name came out crooked, smeared, unauthorized terminations scrawled like graffiti across the page. She didn't even notice. Security appeared in the doorway, all polite smiles and stiff postures like hotel concierges who know the tip won't be good. One of them carried the infamous gratitude basket. Caramel popcorn, a stale voucher for a massage, a corporate condolence prize. I didn't touch it. I walked out past Ivy, past Tucker's smirk, past the interns trying not to look horrified, and through the glass doors I'd opened every day for over a decade. Outside, the air was cold, sharp, clean. It tasted like freedom. But freedom without a plan is just chaos. Luckily, I'd been planning for years. At home, I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of wine, and slid into my workstation. Not the company laptop. I left that sitting on the desk untouched. This was my real gear. The encrypted archive that had hummed quietly under my desk since 2014, built after the first time I caught an executive doctoring compliance logs. Password accepted. Biometric scan confirmed. The interface glowed awake. I navigated straight to my legal folder, and there it was, Covenant version 3.4, redlined and notarized. The clause that mattered was highlighted, annotated by my attorney years ago. Any involuntary termination of designated stakeholder without investor, advisement constitutes breach. Penalty enforceable. $45 million or immediate assumption of control by Everlock Capital. Clause 14. C, my safety net. My hammer. I remembered the day we added it. 6 years ago, with investors breathing down our necks, lawyers circling, everyone paranoid about stability. Executives are reckless, my attorney had said. Eventually, they'll do something stupid. This clause protects you. And now Ivy, in all her arrogance, had just handed me the stupid I'd been waiting for. I scrolled through margin notes, double-checking the language. There was no ambiguity, no wiggle room. Not only had they fired me without notice, they had triggered the nuclear option themselves. My phone buzzed. Anderson, my attorney. "Activate it," I said. My voice was steady, almost casual. Version 3.4. Pause. Then, understood. I leaned back, sipped my wine, and let the silence wash over me. Because while Ivy was probably posting a Boss Babe CEO selfie to LinkedIn, the investors would be reading an automatic notification of breach. And investors don't scroll. They act. By the time the sun dipped low, emails had already started hitting inboxes. Subject line? Urgent. Compliance triggered. Clause 14. See and somewhere, on a jet slicing through clouds at 40,000 feet, Mitchell Brandt, the man whose shadow still haunted this company, Ivy's father, the real power, was being notified that his daughter had just set off a $45 million bomb. The storm wasn't coming. It had already landed. The first call came less than 2 hours after I walked out of that glass tower. I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. If it was important, they'd leave a message. They did. 3 messages, in fact, all variations of the same frantic voice. "Laura, please, we need to talk." Call us back. By the time I sat down at my kitchen table, the inbox on my private email was already swelling. Subject lines like Clause 14C breach protocol and investor notification pending. Every one of them confirmed what I already knew. The covenant had detonated. The real confirmation, though, came an hour later. A black SUV screeched to the curb outside Ivy's kingdom and outstepped her father, Mitchell Brandt. Tailored charcoal suit, travel lines still etched into his face, eyes like a man pulled mid-flight from Tuscany to a battlefield. I wasn't there to see it in person, but former colleagues texted me in a flurry. He stormed straight into the lobby, no bag, no smile. Just rage inside. Ivy must have been basking in her newfound empire, sipping some wellness tea while drafting her vision for the future email. She didn't know yet that the future was about to collapse around her. The boardroom doors slammed. Someone close to the floor later told me they could hear his voice from the elevator bank. "You fired who?" Silence. "Are you insane?" There it was. The first crack in Ivy's perfectly filtered persona. From what I gathered, Tucker tried to explain, fumbling something about legacy costs and streamlining operations. But Mitchell wasn't listening. He wanted names. He wanted contracts. And when Gregory, the CFO with the nervous laugh, finally admitted my termination had triggered Clause 14C, Mitchell went white. For years, investors had tolerated his empire because of stability. The covenant was their insurance policy. And now his daughter had cut the safety line with a single arrogant move. I wasn't watching in person, but I didn't need to. I'd been in enough rooms with Mitchell to picture it. Knuckles pressed into the marble table, jaw clenched so hard it could crack glass. His voice dropping to that deadly quiet tone he saved for when vendors missed deadlines. Get legal. Now and then came the second storm. At precisely 6:47 p.m., an email blast went out from Everlock Capital, our lead investor. Subject line, emergency meeting convened, compliance review. By 8, the auditors were in the building. I got that update from a friend still inside, one of the junior managers Ivy had ignored all day. She texted me a photo from the stairwell. 2 men in slate gray suits walking past security, carrying portfolios thick enough to double as bricks. Their faces expressionless, their pace unhurried. The kind of men who don't waste words because contracts speak louder than anything. Inside the boardroom, they laid the covenant on the table. The original, not the sanitized summary Ivy's intern had slapped into a PowerPoint. They circled my name. Laura Keller, material personnel. Then one of them asked the question no one in that room could answer. Do you have the $45 million penalty ready, or should we just take the keys? I wasn't there, but I swear I could feel the silence all the way across town. Ivy must have tried to bluff. That was her style. Hashtags and slogans, empty confidence. Maybe she said something about narrative control or reframing optics. But investors don't care about optics. They care about enforceable clauses. By then, messages were flooding my phone. Half panicked, half incredulous. Did you plan this? They're pulling financials, Laura. Everything's frozen. Mitchell looks like he's going to collapse. I didn't reply. I sat on my balcony, glass of Cabernet in hand, city lights blinking like nervous investors, and I let it all unfold. Because here's the truth. People like Ivy think power is inherited, that sitting in a big chair makes you a leader. But leadership is proven in footnotes, in late nights, in clauses no one else bothers to read. That's the irony. While she was posting filtered selfies about CEO life, I'd been preparing for exactly this day. And it was only the beginning. The auditors weren't just checking boxes. They were wolves circling blood in the water. They had the covenant, they had the proof, and they had 72 hours to decide whether to strip control from the Brandts altogether. And Ivy? She didn't even realize the fight was no longer hers. That night, I opened my inbox again. One email stood out. A simple subject line, no punctuation. We should talk. From Mitchell Brandt himself. I didn't answer. Not yet. Let him sweat. By morning, the company was on fire. Not literally, but in every way that matters to investors. Slack threads titled, Urgent, compliance were exploding with unanswered questions. The audit portal had already rejected 3 filings. Payroll approvals froze. And junior managers, the same ones Ivy had been preaching streamlining to just a day earlier, were whispering in hallways like frightened kids at a burning school. I didn't have to be there to know it. My phone lit up with frantic texts all morning. Laura, where do you keep the supplier compliance log? Did you file EU cross-border last quarter? No one can find it. Please tell me you backed up the investor portal credentials. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, they weren't looking for logs. They were looking for me. And the contract made it very clear. Without me, the whole operation was out of compliance. Around 9 a.m., Everlock's lead auditor arrived. Brandon Fields. I knew the name, even though we'd never spoken. Former litigator, reputation for surgical efficiency, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he didn't have to. He entered the boardroom without so much as a knock, placed a thick folder on the table, sat down at the head like he'd been there his entire life. From what one colleague later whispered to me, his words were cold, clipped, lethal. Clause 14C has been triggered. You have 72 hours. Either wire $45 million to the account listed here, or Everlock Capital assumes control. No one spoke. Ivy, of course, tried. She reached across the table with a bright, brittle smile. We can work this out, she said. I'm sure there's flexibility. Brandon didn't even look at her hand. He tapped the page where my name sat, circled in red ink. Your flexibility expired the moment you fired her. The silence after that must have been unbearable. Mitchell sat stiff, knuckles pressed into the wood. Gregory, the CFO, fiddled with his wedding ring like it might save him. Rachel, the company's general counsel, stared at her laptop as if a loophole might magically appear if she scrolled long enough. But there was no loophole. I knew that, because I helped write it. The irony was delicious. For years, Mitchell had dismissed my obsession with contracts as paranoia. Laura, don't bog us down in details. Investors care about vision, but vision doesn't save you when your daughter signs a crooked stamp on an unauthorized termination. By lunchtime, the panic had spread beyond the boardroom. Departments froze. Vendors called, confused why payments hadn't cleared. HR drafted 3 different memos, all of them scrapped before they could be sent. Meanwhile, I was sitting at a diner on the edge of town, sipping black coffee and watching it all unfold through the quiet back channel of my old admin account, the one nobody ever thought to revoke. The messages were frantic. The managers were drowning. And the board? They were starting to realize they had no life raft without me. That's when the first real crack appeared. One of my old colleagues forwarded me an email chain. At the top was Ivy's own message, sent 2 weeks before she fired me. Subject line, cutting the deadwood. She had written, in her own words, we need to clean house before Q4 gets here. Starting with Laura. She's deadwood. If anyone raises legal, I'll call it a restructure. We'll bury it in the reorg reading it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because arrogance always leaves fingerprints. And this one was already in Everlock's hands. That email wasn't a restructuring note. It was evidence. Evidence of deliberate termination and breach of contract. Evidence of retaliation. Evidence that would tighten the noose around Ivy's neck faster than any investor clause could. By mid-afternoon, my attorney Anderson called. They're bleeding, he said simply. Investors are circling. Mitchell is demanding a meeting with you. I swirled the last of my coffee in the cup. And Ivy? A pause. Cracking. She's pacing the halls like a trapped animal. Every attempt at confidence collapses under her father's stare. I leaned back against the diner booth, staring at the highway outside. Cars flowed steady, oblivious. Life went on, but for the Brants, time was running out. You want me to go in? I asked. Anderson chuckled. Not yet. The longer you wait, the more desperate they get. Let the penalty clock tick. And so I did. As evening fell, my phone buzzed again. Another email from Mitchell. This one, not just a line. Laura, we need to meet. Tonight. Please. Please. From Mitchell Brant, the man who once told me everyone was replaceable. I closed the email without replying. Because for the first time in 12 years, I was the one holding the cards. And the game was only beginning. When I finally agreed to meet, it wasn't in the boardroom. Not yet. Mitchell insisted on dinner. A private corner at a quiet steakhouse uptown. The kind of place where the wine list has no prices and the waiters pretend not to hear. He looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the flight. Maybe it was the weight of watching his empire collapse in less than 48 hours. "Laura," he said as soon as I sat down. No pleasantries, no smile. Just my name, spoken like it hurt his throat. I let him talk first. Years of working with Mitchell had taught me that silence unnerves him more than confrontation. "They blindsided me," he said finally. "I had no idea she was—" His jaw locked. He didn't say Ivy's name. This was reckless. Short-sighted. And now Everlock is breathing down my neck like wolves. "You know what they're threatening I do," I said calmly. 45 million, he muttered, as if saying it aloud might make it less real. "We don't have it. Not liquid. Not even close. If they take control—" He trailed off, staring into his glass of scotch. The silence stretched between us. Around us, forks clinked on plates, conversations hummed, but the weight at our table made it feel like a vacuum. Finally, I leaned forward. "Mitchell, you should know something. They're not bluffing." His eyes flicked up. For the first time in years, I saw fear there. "I helped draft that covenant," I continued. "I know every word, every footnote. The clause was designed to protect investors from exactly this. An impulsive executive removing a stabilizing stakeholder. There's no wiggle room." He scrubbed a hand across his face. "I should never have let her—" He stopped himself again, swallowed, and started over. "What do you want, Laura? You didn't come here just to watch me drown." I held his gaze. "I want what I built to survive. But I won't step back into chaos." The waiter arrived, interrupting with plates of food we wouldn't touch. Mitchell waved him away, then leaned in, voice low. "If you came back, full authority, the investors would be satisfied. They'd rescind the breach." "You know they would." "Maybe," I said. "But that's not my problem anymore. You let her make it mine when you handed her the stamp." He flinched. Not visibly, not to anyone else. But I saw it. The truth landing like a blade. "Laura." His voice softened, almost pleading now. "She's my daughter." "And I was your backbone," I said. "When the servers caught fire, when the auditors circled, when the contracts nearly fell apart, I held it together. You let her throw me out like I was nothing. That wasn't just her mistake. It was yours." He sat back, shoulders sagging. For once, Mitchell Brandt didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a man cornered. "I need time," he muttered. "If I can stall them, find funding." I shook my head. "You don't have time. The auditors will be back tomorrow, and the board knows it." He stared at me for a long moment, then finally said the words I'd been waiting for. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled a small envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from Everlock's oversight team. "Effective upon breach, operational oversight may be reassigned at investor discretion. Advisory rights may be delegated to external parties at Everlock's choosing." His eyes lifted to mine. Realization dawning. "You," he said slowly. "Me," I confirmed. "They've already reached out." Quietly. "They don't trust her. They don't trust you. They trust me." The scotch glass trembled slightly in his hand. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll lose everything," I said, my voice steady. "Your board knows it. Your investors know it." "And Ivy?" I let the silence finish the sentence. He exhaled heavily, like the fight had left him. For the rest of the dinner, we said little. The food went cold. By the time I left, Mitchell still hadn't touched his steak. He just sat there staring at that piece of paper like it was the death warrant of his dynasty. Back in my car, I checked my phone. A new email had arrived. From Brandon Fields, the auditor himself. Emergency meeting, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Attendance required. Covenant enforcement discussion required, not optional. I leaned back in the driver's seat, the city lights flickering in my rear view. Tomorrow wasn't going to be dinner in a quiet corner. Tomorrow was going to be war in the boardroom. And for once, I wouldn't be the one waiting to be called in. I'd be the one walking through those glass doors with the investors at my back. The next morning, I didn't dress for war. I dressed for clarity. Simple black suit, no jewelry except the watch I'd worn through every deal that kept the company alive. When I walked into the lobby, no one stopped me. Not security, not reception. They all looked down, pretending not to notice. Word had spread. Everyone knew Clause 14C had been triggered, and everyone knew whose name was on it. The boardroom was packed. Executives, lawyers, auditors, faces pale, papers scattered, coffee gone cold. At the head of the table sat Brandon Fields, Everlock's lead auditor. Same slate gray suit, same unreadable face. Mitchell was already there, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow. Ivy sat 2 seats down, a perfect mask of defiance cracking at the edges. Her phone was face down in front of her, as if even she knew no hashtag could fix this. Brandon began without ceremony. We are here under Clause 14C of the Funding Covenant. Termination of designated material personnel without advisement constitutes breach. The penalty is $45 million or immediate assumption of control by Everlock Capital. He tapped the covenant on the table. My name, circled in red. No one spoke. Gregory, the CFO, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Rachel, legal counsel, flipped through her binder, searching for air in a drowning pool. Mitchell kept his eyes fixed on the table. Finally, Ivy broke the silence. This is an overreaction, she said, her voice pitched high, brittle. We can negotiate. Frame this differently. The optics... Brandon didn't even turn his head. This isn't optics. It's contract law. Her words withered in the air. Mitchell finally looked up. His voice was gravel. We can't pay the penalty. The admission hung there like a death sentence. Gregory's pen stopped moving. Rachel closed her binder. Every board member knew what came next. Brandon adjusted his cufflinks and continued. Per covenant language, Everlock will assume oversight. Effective immediately, he slid a black folder across the table. Transition documents are ready for signature. The room went still. Ivy surged to her feet. You can't just take my company. Brandon raised one eyebrow. Your company? He pushed the folder toward Mitchell. Sign. Mitchell's hand hovered over the pen. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I used to work for. The one who built an empire with grit and instinct. The man who once told me trust was everything. But trust is fragile. And he had broken mine. He signed. Slowly, deliberately, his name scratched onto paper like a resignation from his own legacy. Brandon closed the folder with surgical precision. Then he turned to me. Per Everlock's directive, advisory rights are being delegated externally. Miss Keller, that means you. Every head in the room snapped toward me. Ivy's face drained of color. Her? You're putting her in charge? Brandon's voice was calm, final. Everlock trusts stability, and Miss Keller is stability. The words landed like a gavel. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply placed my hands on the table, palms steady. The first step, I said evenly, is compliance. The second is rebuilding trust. And that starts today. The board nodded, some reluctantly, some with visible relief. They wanted survival. I was offering it. Ivy, though, wasn't finished. She stood trembling, mascara smudged, fists clenched. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll fix this. I'll prove... Mitchell cut her off, his voice sharper than I'd heard it in years. Sit down, Ivy. She froze. Her own father. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Slowly, she sank back into her chair. And just like that, her reign was over. The meeting adjourned within the hour. Brandon left without shaking hands, his job done. Gregory muttered about numbers. Rachel avoided eye contact. Mitchell lingered by the window, staring out at a skyline that no longer belonged to him. I gathered my things calmly. No basket, no ceremony, just quiet recognition from the people who had once dismissed me. In the hallway, I passed Ivy. She didn't look at me. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but she didn't answer. For the first time, she seemed small, not powerful, not untouchable. Just a young woman who thought inheritance was the same as leadership, and learned too late that it wasn't. Outside, the air was crisp, clear. I walked down the steps, past the glass doors, and into the sunlight. My phone buzzed again. An email from Everlock confirming my new advisory role. A title, not in-house, but powerful enough to decide the direction of the company I had once bled for. I smiled, not out of revenge, but out of something steadier. Vindication. Because here's the truth. Power isn't inherited. It's earned in the quiet moments, the footnotes, the late nights when no one's watching. And when arrogance burns down the house, it's the foundation that survives.